Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogath. Now, Shannon Lauffer has been on a couple times recently, and we talked about how popular she is, and she's kind of letting it go to her head. But I did feel like we need to bring her on one more time. She has a lot of areas of expertise, and I think she has so many great ideas, and she brings all of these very sort of difficult topics, things we don't talk about enough as art teachers, and she makes them really entertaining. So I wanted to bring her back because recently I was reviewing some of her footage for a pro learning pack that she was recording, and it is just full of great ideas on working with paraprofessionals. And so I was hoping she could summarize some of those ideas, in the podcast here, because this is something I have always struggled with. And I know a lot of art teachers struggle with, how to deal with paraprofessionals in your room. What should you ask them to do? How can you best share expectations? What happens if you have something go wrong? How do you deal with that? How do you approach that? And, we'll go through that and a lot more today. But honestly, this discussion is only going to be scratching the surface. There's so much more you can dive into, and I'll give you some ideas and some recommendations throughout the show. But first, if you really want to learn a lot more, you need to look out for the Pro Pack that'll be coming. Not for a few months, though, but there will be videos, a ton of downloadable resources, and just so much more in there. And while you are waiting for Shannon's Pro Pack, there are so many more that you can explore. There are 3 new ones this month. One is all about peer feedback by Kim Jensen, who is an amazing facilitator from California. There's a pack that I put together all about surviving your first year of teaching high school. So if you don't listen to me enough on this podcast and you want to listen to me talk for another hour and a half about that, then make sure you check that out. Okay, and Nick Hahn has a pack on monoprinting also, which is really engaging and quite a bit of fun. So we release 3 new packs on the first of every month, and just an incredibly extensive library at this point. If you have not checked it out yet, make sure you take a look and start your free trial at theartofed.com/pro. All right, enough from me. It is time to bring Shannon on and start our entertaining conversation. So here she is. All right, I am here with Shannon Lauffer. Shannon, how are you?
I'm so good. It's me again.
I know. I'm so excited to have you back on the show. So it's fun stuff. You're always popular. But so behind the scenes, just talking about Art Ed Pro, you recorded a learning pack recently all about working with paraprofessionals. And I was the lucky person who got to review all the footage, which is super exciting.
Lucky you.
I know. And I thought to myself that, hey, this would make a great podcast as well. So I'm excited to talk to you about it. So let's just start off, with a simple question. Like, why do you think it's so important to have a good collaborative relationship with your paraprofessionals?
Man, when paraprofessionals come into your classroom, this is a moment of either like, this can be so fantastic for my students, or this can be a real detriment to their learning.
Yes.
So setting up a positive relationship, a positive working relationship with paraprofessionals is super, super important. This can almost become almost like a co-teaching model. And when a paraprofessional is in your room, it's because the students need support. So establishing this collaborative relationship is good, A, for you, because you can utilize them to the best of their ability and to the greatest needs for the students, but also for this paraprofessional to understand what you need as the teacher. I think the most important thing to remember, just kind of working with humans in general, is that you always have to be able to step into their shoes. So this paraprofessional is probably with the same student or students for most of the day. And they go all different places. They're in like their, self-contained classroom, maybe a regular education classroom for inclusion. They come to all the specials, they do this, they do that. And everybody has their own routines and everybody has their own rules. So like, imagine how hard it is for that paraprofessional to adapt to each and every space. So I think that's the most important reason that we want to build this great relationship from day one, is so that they understand the expectations and what to do in your classroom.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I want to dive into some of those ideas a little bit later. But, first off, just thinking about, getting the relationship started right. I think a big part of that, like you said, when you're working with anybody, but specifically paraprofessionals, is creating that line of communication. So like, how do you make sure that you get started on the right foot, open up those lines of communication? Like, what are your strategies at the beginning of this working relationship?
So I would say the most important thing is to introduce yourself as soon as possible. So if you're starting in a new school, or if you're in the same school and you have new paraprofessionals coming in, like, mosey on down on your first couple days and like introduce yourself face to face. This is just kind of great practice with colleagues in general, but I think is really going to make your paras feel welcomed in your classroom. I also really love to kick off the year with a welcome letter for my paraprofessionals. First off, it's so powerful because you're expressing gratitude for everything that they're going to do during the school year. And also telling them what they can expect when they walk in. Because just the way your students would walk in on the first day, like, support staff is going to want to know what to expect as well. So, you can tell them like where they can put their bag or their lunch or their purse, where they can find a seat to use so they don't have to sit in like a, 1.5 foot tall chair. They can have an adult chair, or like what your classroom rules and expectations are, the protocol they need to take their students for a break. These are all just like little things that you might not think about, but if you put them out there on day one in a letter, it's going to ease a lot of those, frustrations and concerns on their ends.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I also wanted to ask you, just kind of along those same lines, on something that you mentioned in your first answer. It's tough for them to keep track of everything that's going on, especially when they are in so many different classrooms. So, how do you, besides the welcome letter, how do you help parents know everything that's going on in your room? Like, especially specific to art, we have so many routines, procedures, little things we do in the art room. Like, how do you let them know everything that's going on?
It's super useful to create almost like a binder. So what if you gather all these things, like, this is the bathroom protocol. This is what happens during a lockdown. This is where we go for a fire drill. Just think about those days. Like, I'm sure we've all been there, where you have a class of like 25 kids and all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off and you're like, oh my gosh, they don't even know how to walk in a straight line yet. Like, how will I get them to the middle of the soccer field? If your paraprofessional knows those routines and has them in front of them, they can help you get those kids to where they need to be. But it's hard for them to help you if they don't know what to expect. So my best piece of advice is to make a binder that has all these little, routines, expectations that, not like 400 pages, but just some of the things that they will need to know to make their life easier, to support their students, and also to support you when some of these things might be happening.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that's going to work out really well. And I also wanted to kind of address something negative. I think a lot of teachers have had an experience with this, where the paras either just get so excited about having art supplies in their hands, or they're so worried about the kids' work looking, like adults think it should look, that they just kind of take over. Okay. And they are doing the work for the kids. So I guess what do you think are the best strategies to ensure that paras are providing the right amount of help, the right amount of support, making sure they're not doing work for the kids? And if they are, how do you address that?
Yeah. So this is probably the trickiest part of working with other adults in your classroom. So I think the first thing I would do is outline that expectation in my paraprofessional letter. Student work is student work. Please do not do artwork for students. They should be doing their own work. I'm more concerned with the process over the product. A great way to kind of back that up is to talk about assessment. So you can say like, it's my job to assess all of these students, and I can't assess the student's ability to, master a certain technique or to make growth over the course of a school year if you are doing the work for them. So always, it's great to have kind of like a little backup piece to, support your claim. The reason I don't want you working on their paper is because of assessment. Also, it's so powerful for a student to make their own marks. Like if we take that away from students, how detrimental is that? But I think it's also really important to go over the different levels of support. So this is sometimes, I think a lot of us do this without thinking, but there's actually like a prompt hierarchy that in special education is used. So if a student is unable to do something independently, what do they need to do it? Do they need just a verbal prompt? Can you just like gesture towards something? So if the student's supposed to have a pencil in their hand and they don't have a pencil in their hand, you can just tap next to the pencil. And then that prompts them to remember like, oh, I should pick up my pencil. However, like the most invasive prompt would be a hand over hand. So where, if a student is really struggling with something, let's say they're painting and they have low tone in their hand, they can't grip the paintbrush. The paraprofessional might use a hand over hand method. So the student is holding the paintbrush and their hand is on top of theirs. So that would be the most invasive thing we would ever want to see. We should never see the paraprofessional, doing the work for the student. Cause that's not, it's not even prompting. It's, just supporting them. I guess I know I'm kind of going on and on about this, but another thing to consider is if you see that, is the task that you've assigned the student outside of their ability? Do we need to modify the project? So I know with a lot of my little guys, like cutting is really hard. They might be able to cut straight lines, and maybe they need like a spring-loaded scissor or some hand-over-hand support. But if I'm asking them to cut out a bunch of circles, is that something, should that be a goal right now? And if not, it's like, okay, the job of we're going to modify the project. The paraprofessional cuts the circles and then puts them in front of the student. So we're taking away one of these skills that a student is unable to master at this point. And then we've modified the project so that they can still engage with the material at their own level. Whew. Did I answer the question?
You did, but your answer actually made me ask another question. I'm just thinking about that hierarchy of prompts. Obviously, we want to work on, kids having less and less help from their paras. I don't even know if less support is the right word, but, moving up that hierarchy where they don't need quite as much assistance. Like, do you keep...
Can I just interject super quick?
Yes.
Because something that I've talked about with some of my friends in special ed and with some of the paras that I've worked with is like, the goal of a para is to, how do you put it? Like, is to like work themselves out of a job.
Right.
The ideal thing is to have all of our students be, fully independent to complete all their work on their own. So I digress. But I just think that's such an interesting way to consider. Like the ultimate goal is not to have support K through 12. The ultimate goal is to be able to fade that support as time goes on.
Yeah.
So I totally interrupted your question.
No, that's okay, because I was just randomly circling around thoughts in my head and you succinctly put them together for me. So I appreciate that.
Perfect.
The question I was thinking, like, do you design projects or design modifications so that kids need less support for them? Or do you just kind of adapt the supports to go along with the project that you have in mind?
So I guess it depends on what kind of a class you're teaching. If you are teaching like an inclusion art class, you would design your project and then you would have modifications in mind, accommodations and modifications in mind for the students who maybe cannot complete all the aspects of that project. the last thing you would ever want to do is say like, well, all my students are doing this, and the ones who are struggling, like they're just going to color. Mm-hmm. Like, like we would never just isolate students because they struggle. We're always working towards the same objective. And I think this is something I kept circling back to when I was talking about differentiation is you always stay focused on your objective. So in an inclusion classroom, you would design supports so that all students are challenged and are learning, but can still be successful. So whether that means, providing students with some pre-made pieces that they can assemble on their own, or giving them, a certain level of, hand over hand support or, a partial physical prompt, we're still setting them up to do the work independently. However, I think it's a little bit different if you're working in like what do they call it? Like an adaptive art class, or you have a self-contained class that comes to you for their own art class. In that situation, you might be focusing more on the skills that we're trying to master. So if these are a group of students that, maybe struggle with fine motor, like maybe cutting is the objective. And they might all be at different levels. Cutting seems to be just like the hardest skill to teach kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you think about it, like, man, opening a scissor, closing a scissor, guiding the paper, holding two hands, like there's so much going on. But like you might design an entire project just around that skill. So I think also another important thing to remember is if a student's working on a skill that they haven't mastered, you always want to pair it with something they have mastered. Or else they'll just feel like they're failing the whole time. But if we can say like, okay, cutting is hard, but next we're going to glue. Like if the student already understands how to glue and, assemble something, then we're pairing something that's hard with something that they already know how to do. So that kind of supports them through that process.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I kind of want to ask you, just circling back to paras working themselves out of a job. When kids are working well on their own, a lot of times paras will have some downtime. Do you think it's okay to ask them to do something extra? And like, how do you approach that? Like, you don't want to be like, hey, I notice you're standing around doing nothing. Do you want to wash some brushes for me? Like, is there a better way to go about that? And do you think it's okay to ask them for some additional help?
I think it is. And this, obviously would be on such a case by case basis. Right. So I guess I can talk about my own experience. In my own experience, like my paras have just been so fantastic. So if I say like, oh my gosh, I'm totally swamped. Like, would you mind cutting some paper for me? I need 9 by 12. I have 18 by 36. They're like, no problem. Like they are happy to jump in and help. I think it's really helpful to have kind of a list of things. Like, these are the tasks that kind of take my time at the end of the day. It's washing brushes. It's wiping down countertops. It's, reorganizing my paper table or whatever it is. At the end of the year, it's like testing all my markers so I can decide which ones have to get recycled and which ones we can keep. So if you have a list, that's a great way that you can say like, hey, it looks like your student is really thriving right now. Like, do you want to step away for a little bit? However, I think it's really important to, establish that boundary of like, keep checking in with them. Like the last thing we want is for the student to finish what they're doing and to not know what to do next. But I've told my paraprofessional to like go hang up artwork in the hallway. Yeah. Like, and then you look around and it's like, well, now I can't help the student and they're sitting by themselves. They don't know what to do. So it's really finding that balance of like, how well the student is doing independently, if any other students maybe need support or help, and how big of a job you might give them to work on.
Yeah, that makes sense too. Okay. Yeah. And then I just have one last question for you, because not all of us have had wonderful paras our entire careers. So
it's true.
If you do run into a spot where you have some conflict, something where you're on the different page, maybe they're doing something you don't want them to do. Maybe they're working on kids' artwork, even though you've asked them and told them why you don't want them to do that. Or even like undermining classroom management. I've had that happen before. Like, how do you approach that? What's the best way to deal with that, in your opinion?
Yeah. So, I think like the biggest things I've dealt with is like undermining, or like if you have several paraprofessionals in a class, they'll kind of like talk in the background, like talk to each other or talk over you while you're teaching. And it's like, oh my gosh. So, I think, step one is like we set our expectations at the beginning of the year. So like, do not, like, you might have a few things of like in your paraprofessional letter, like, do not, only one adult should talk at a time. If classroom management issues arise, please alert me and I will deal with them. However, conflict is bound to happen. I mean, again, whenever you're working with humans, conflict is part of it. So for me, the most important thing is, I'm not a parent, but I think this is what parents do and they're successful, is like present a united front. So like the worst thing you can do is like pin us against each other. So, if my paraprofessional, says one thing and I want something different, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong in front of all my students, because then my students see that there's a conflict. Right. So what I might do is say like, I heard Mrs. So-and-so say that you lost recess today. I will let your teacher know. Please tell me what happened. I might debrief with that child. And then afterwards, I'm going to follow up with my para and say like, for me, this is kind of my own philosophy. Like, I don't believe in taking away recess. So in the future, please do not do that. Yeah. This is my, it kind of comes down to like, this is your classroom. At a certain point, you have to own it, and you don't want to push somebody out and make them feel like they are less, but it's your classroom and it's your job to make those decisions. So, maybe right after class, depending on what your relationship looks like, you can kind of debrief and say like, in the future, please do not do that. I'll make the decisions. You can let me know when it's happening and I will intervene. Some people don't respond super well to that. So it's, always kind of navigating those waters of conflict between individuals is like, I'm listening to you. I hear what you're saying. I know you're working in the best interest of kids, but in the future, this is what will happen. And I guess like, the other really important thing about working with people is just knowing that like, you're not going to get along with everybody. Yes. We have to have a professional working relationship. We will present a united front in front of kids. But other than that, if you don't like me and I don't maybe like you, it is what it is. Yeah. Our objective is to teach kids. So I guess that would be my best bit of advice for when that arises.
No, I think that works. And I think that is some really good advice. So cool. That'll also be a good place to leave it. So we will go ahead and wrap it up. Shannon, thank you again so much for coming on and sharing all of this awesome advice. It's always great to talk to you.
Hey, you're welcome.
And hopefully we can have you back on the podcast again soon. Thanks.
Excellent. I love to talk. So.
All right. See you later.
Thanks so much, Tim.
All right. Thank you to Shannon for coming on. If you want to learn more, again, that Pro Pack will be coming in the next few months. But in the meantime, I want you to check out our article on the AOE site called What You Need to Know About Inclusive Education in the Art Room. We'll link to it with the show notes, of course, so just go to the AOE site and you can access it there. But the ideas in there are incredible. It goes far beyond just how to deal with paraprofessionals. Shannon has so much great advice in that article about special education law, inclusion, ideas for your classroom, and even further recommendations on how to add to your learning beyond what's in there. And that's what we're trying to get at here, giving you the ideas that you need to gain more understanding, to be better in your classroom, and to be better for your kids. Art Ed Radio is produced by The Art of Education with audio engineering from Michael Crocker. Thank you for listening, as always. Next week, Abby Shukai is going to be back on talking about career education. It is always good to have Abby on, and I am really looking forward to it. We'll talk to you then.